Before the world was told to stay home, another timeline was already humming beneath the surface. Auctions, masts, promises of a digital destiny, rolled out in lockstep with lockdowns, fear, and daily briefings. From Wuhan's pilot city to the first wave of pandemic theater, two monumental scripts collided. Progress and fear, hand in hand. This is the double ledger, and it begins here. Section 1. The Global Timeline Introduction. Before the world was told to stay home. Before streets emptied and tape marked the floors of supermarkets, another timeline was already humming beneath the surface. It was the timeline of infrastructure, the auctioning of frequencies, the installation of masts, the promises of a frictionless digital future. Governments called it progress. Telecom executives called it inevitability. Journalists called it innovation. The public was told to expect transformation, faster speeds, lower latency, cities that would think and speak in code. Fifth-generation networks were not presented as a choice, but as a destiny, a horizon toward which humanity was marching, whether it liked it or not. This was not a secret. It was carried out in press conferences and staged announcements. Ministers stood behind podiums and spoke in numbers. Billions raised, licenses granted, coverage expanding. South Korea moved early in 2018, a ritual signal that Asia would lead. China mapped pilot cities in 2019 and named Wuhan among them, promising ultrafast connectivity for industry and citizens. In the United States, Verizon and AT&T launched millimeter wave nodes across select urban blocks, promising the future on street corners and stadiums. Europe choreographed its own sequence. Italy, Spain, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, each with regulators, each with dates, each with the same script. The map was not random. It was coordinated. The language was not accidental. It was repeated. And then, almost without pause, a second timeline crashed into the first. Late 2019, reports of a novel coronavirus in Wuhan. January 2020, alerts and advisories, a rising hum of concern. February brought escalation, and on March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. Within days, borders closed and cities were locked. Italy announced a national shutdown. Spain followed. The UK ordered the public to stay home. The United States rolled out restrictions state by state. People watched their world narrow into kitchens, screens, and sanctioned corridors of movement. The planetary pulse slowed to a controlled beat. Two timelines, one world. Infrastructure expansion and social contraction. Towers rising and roads emptying. Masts being installed while families learned the choreography of queuing and distancing. The simultaneity mattered not because one caused the other, but because they were rolled out together, presented as parallel inevitabilities. Progress and fear, hand in hand. It was not just policy, it was theater. And theater, when staged at scale, changes how people see, think, and obey. Consider the auctions as ritual acts. They were not dry bureaucratic moments, they were performances. Each country announced its own calendar, its own spectacle of competitive bidding and national ambition. Numbers were displayed like trophies. Headlines carried phrases like Race to 5G, Digital Transformation, Unlocking Innovation. Executive interviews promised revolutions in medicine, manufacturing, transport, and entertainment. The promise was not merely speed. It was a new way of life. A city where sensors speak to servers, where vehicles whisper to traffic lights, where hospitals consult algorithms before surgeons consult scalpel. The audience was invited to fall in love with efficiency, with invisibly choreographed convenience, with a web of connections that would make friction feel like a relic. Now consider the pandemic declarations and lockdown orders as a counter-ritual. They, too, were performances. Authority figures stood behind podiums and spoke in numbers. Cases, deaths, rates, curves. Press briefings trained the public in a new vocabulary. Slogans arrived overnight. Stay home, save lives, protect the NHS, flatten the curve. Citizens were guided into a choreography of waiting and watching, a dance of compliance. Screens became pulpits. Graphs became icons. The hum of fear became the rune tone of daily life. Place the two rituals side by side, and the rhythm reveals itself. A double ledger, not of accounting, but of atmosphere. On one side, auction dates, pilot launches, frequency allocations, coverage maps. On the other, declarations, lockdowns, daily briefings, death curves. The beat is the same, rolling announcements, nation by nation, week by week, a drumline of inevitability. The audience doesn't need to be told to connect them. The mind does it automatically when two sequences share tempo and scale. Wuhan becomes a symbol in this overlay. Not just the name of an outbreak, but a pilot city for a new network. The word appears twice in the story. Once as a node on a map of innovation, once as the origin point of a global crisis. Italy becomes the stage of Europe's shock, a country with 5G ambitions in Milan and Rome. A country that locks down first and sets the tone for continental obedience. Spain becomes rapid spread and urban deployment. Madrid and Barcelona mapped for telecom expansion, mapped again for curfews and restrictions. The UK becomes the dual narrative auctions and mass deployments on one side, a national stay-home order on March 23rd and an April death peak on the other. The United States becomes fragmented choreography patchwork city launches for millimeter wave, patchwork state lockdowns for pandemic management, two incomplete mosaics stitched together into a single impression of overwhelming control. Germany, France, the Nordics each adds another bar to the score, synchronized through rhetoric even when the figures differ. What happens to human perception under this kind of simultaneity? Obedience is easier when change is presented as the only path. If the future demands new infrastructure and the present demands new restrictions, both can be framed as necessary adjustments. One rewires the world's nervous system, the other rewires the public's behavior. The lexicon of inevitability bleeds from one narrative into the other. Citizens are told, this is the price of progress. This is the price of safety. Resistance is reframed as irresponsibility. Questions are reframed as misinformation. The stage lights are bright. Squinting is called denial. It would be comfortable to claim causation, to stitch the two timelines together with a single thread and declare one the author of the other. But comfort is not the point, and causation is not necessary. Correlation is enough when the objective is optics. The human brain is wired to notice patterns and assign meaning. When two monumental scripts escalate together, they acquire a shared aura. The aura becomes memory. Memory becomes assent. And assent, once ritualized, becomes policy's best friend. This is why the global timeline introduction must be written as a ledger and as a feeling. Dates are essential, but they are not sufficient. We need to show how the announcements landed, how daily briefings felt in kitchens, how mast installations felt in neighborhoods, how funerals felt under restrictions, how economic promises felt beside economic freezes. The truth is not just in the sequence. It is in the simultaneity of lived experience. The citizen audit begins here. It is not about debating abstract models. It is about verifying local facts. When did the mast go live on your street? When did your city's auction results make the news? What was happening in your hospitals that week? Which slogans were plastered across bus stops? Which shops closed and which delivery services expanded? Which meetings moved to video calls and which contracts moved to digital signatures? Build the ledger with dates and observations. Layer the local with the global. The chronicle is not a story told to you. It is a map you draw and then overlay. The lesson of this introduction is discipline. Resist the rush to single cause explanations and focus on tempo. Look for synchronized rollouts, mirrored rhetoric, harmonized rituals. Notice how digital transformation becomes the balm for a disrupted world. Notice how resilience becomes the new virtue in corporate and governmental messaging. The word that makes surveillance feel like safety and infrastructure feel like compassion. Notice how the hunger for connection, stoked by isolation, is satisfied by promises of 5G applications, telemedicine, remote work, streamed education, until the public begins to equate bandwidth with solace. There is a psychological law at work. When two vast systems move in concert, they become mutually reinforcing. The public's acceptance of restrictions eases the path for infrastructure expansion. The expansion's promise of utility eases the public's acceptance of restrictions. The circle closes. People are asked to endure because the future will be brighter. People are asked to adopt the future because endurance has taught them to hunger for brightness. If the double ledger is performed well, debate weakens and adoption accelerates. The introduction does not accuse. It reveals. It reveals the choreography of announcements, the rhythm of statistics, the staging of inevitability. It invites readers to step off the stage, step into the aisle, and watch the performance from a critic's distance. From that vantage point, the patterns sharpen. You see the banners, the slogans, the synchronized graphics. You see the ministers and executives occupying the same aesthetic space: podiums, lights, promise, data. You see the audience being trained to applaud progress and accept confinement as two halves of the same virtue. When you proceed to the country chapters, carry this rhythm with you. Do not let dates float alone. Anchor them to moments of lived experience. Do not let coverage maps distract you. Ask what those maps meant for the street. Do not let death curves obscure the household. Ask what those curves meant for rituals of mourning. The Chronicle is not just about the infrastructure of networks and hospitals. It is about the infrastructure of feeling and memory. The global timeline introduction ends, but the audit begins. It is now your turn to assemble the double ledger. Auctions against advisories, massed activations against lockdown orders, promises against silencings, progress against obedience. Then ask the question that matters. Who wrote the tempo, and who benefits when the world moves to it? Wake TF up. Section 2. China. The first wave. Before Europe's plazas fell quiet and America argued over state lines, the first collision of timelines had already happened in China. Wuhan wasn't only a dateline on nightly news. It was a pilot city for a network the world was told it needed. In late 2019, as operators mapped ultrafast connectivity and ministries staged announcements of a frictionless digital future, the city was simultaneously mapped as the epicenter of a novel coronavirus. Two scripts shared a stage. Two drums hit the same beat. The first script spoke the language of destiny. Fifth-generation networks, the promise of speed, the elimination of friction. Auctions weren't pitched as debates about public trade-offs. They were framed as national rites of passage. Licenses weren't presented as tools. They were presented as keys to modernity. Wuhan, along with other Chinese cities, was cast as a showcase: smart hospitals humming with data, factories learning to talk to algorithms, roads learning to listen. The choreography was familiar: podiums, numbers, visuals, inevitability. The second script spoke the language of emergency: case counts, R rates, curves. December reports of pneumonia of unknown cause. January escalation. By late January, Wuhan sealed. Trains stopped. Planes canceled. Residents ordered home. February pushed scenes the world still remembers: hospital corridors crowded, makeshift wards raised overnight, families separated by tape and rules. March turned local disaster into planetary crisis. The World Health Organization declared a pandemic, and the name Wuhan became a global keyword for fear. Place the scripts side by side, and the rhythm reveals itself. Infrastructure expansion and social contraction rolled out together with a shared cadence of inevitability. The optics are the point. When two monumental sequences escalate in tandem, they braid into a single atmosphere. The mind does the rest. Infrastructure narrative. China's ministries announced commercial licenses for fifth-generation networks in mid-2019, signaling that pilot phases would give way to public deployments. Operators told a story of coverage expanding through the year, with early clusters in industrial hubs and major cities. Wuhan's name appears in those narratives as a demonstration site: smart manufacturing, smart healthcare, smart city services, woven into slogans about national strength and modernization. The press carried images of masts, schematics, and coverage maps. Executives spoke calmly about inevitability. The future would run on low latency. The future would be measured in bandwidth. The future would be built on sensors and signals. The public rhetoric didn't ask, should we? It declared, we will. When announcements repeat the same themes: innovation, transformation, competitiveness, the sound becomes ritual. Numbers are displayed like trophies. Cities are named like chapters in a progress saga. A chorus gathers: regulators, state broadcasters, corporate spokespeople. The horizon is set. Outbreak narrative late 2019. Reports of unexplained pneumonia cluster in Wuhan. January brings escalation. Numbers ascend. Measures tighten. January 23rd marks the moment the city is locked down. Disruption becomes the daily form of life. Transport suspended, checkpoints placed, household routines rewritten. February is saturated with scenes of emergency medicine and public struggle. The world watches, and the name Wuhan becomes a symbol of crisis. March lifts that symbol from one geography to all geographies. A declaration of pandemic reframes the world's days, and Wuhan becomes a global metaphor for the origin of a shared ordeal. The public rhetoric shifts to urgency. Authority figures speak in nightly briefings. Daily counts turn into anchor segments. New vocabulary enters kitchens and phones. Flatten the curve, social distancing, essential services. The sound becomes ritual again: graphs, podiums, solemn tones. People learn that compliance is public virtue. People learn that obedience is a form of care. Simultaneity. What happens when two rituals share a calendar? The eye begins to link them. The ear hears the same tempo. The hand of policy moves with a steady metronome. In Wuhan, towers rise as roads empty. Masts are installed as corridors quiet. Executive interviews about digital medicine appear alongside footage of doctors in protective gear. Speeches about networked factories appear alongside footage of empty shop fronts and masked queues. The optic is powerful because it is layered. Progress and fear, side by side, each narrated as necessary. It's comfortable to desire a single thread, one cause, one effect, one grand explanation to simplify the world. But comfort is not analysis, and certainty is not discipline. The Chronicle refuses the seduction of single-cause stories and focuses on tempo. When infrastructure rituals and emergency rituals advance in parallel, perception shifts. Two scripts can be separate in mechanism, but united in atmosphere. That atmosphere governs assent. How simultaneity trains perception. Repetition. When nightly briefings and quarterly telecom announcements repeat the same frame, inevitability audiences absorb tempo as truth. Staging. Podiums, logos, coordinated visuals, crisp numbers. Both narratives adopt the same stagecraft. Language. Progress rhetoric and safety rhetoric share keywords: resilience, transformation, necessity. Memory. Overlapping dates create overlays in the public mind. One timeline becomes the background music for the other. Wuhan becomes the double icon: a pilot city for a network, an origin city for a crisis. The name is carried in two registers, and the registers reinforce each other. Innovations promised for health and logistics are presented as the balm for the reality of health and logistics under duress. The loop closes. Endure now. Innovate tomorrow. Innovate tomorrow. Endure now. The ledger approach, the Chronicle insists on ledgers, dates, places, announcements, lived moments. It refuses hazy generalities and demands concrete sequences. The citizen audit is not a debate about theory. It is a practice of verification. A local ledger asks, when did a mast go live on this street? When did the hospital report capacity strain? What did the nightly news lead with that week? What public slogans appeared on the buses and the billboards? What rules governed funerals? Which deliveries increased? Which hours changed? Ledger entries can be banal. That's the point. The banality of simultaneity is how atmospheres are built. A Wuhan ledger can be constructed by residents, journalists, and archivists. It is an overlay, infrastructure milestones matched against household realities. The skeleton is dates, the muscle is feelings. When we map them together, the choreography shows itself. Optics of control. The infrastructure narrative is framed as resilience. The outbreak narrative is framed as necessity. Together, they ask for assent. The first says, to survive and thrive, we must interconnect everything. The second says, to protect each other, we must restrict everything. In Wuhan, the two messages did not arrive as contradictions. They arrived as complements. Restriction is sold as care. Interconnection is sold as compassion. The promise of a system that anticipates need is presented as a moral good. The discipline of waiting is presented as a moral good. Two moral goods, braided into a single public mood. Public mood governs policy. When mood is calibrated by synchronized announcements, the path of least resistance is adoption. And adoption, paced correctly, feels voluntary even when it is conditioned. What is indisputable? Certain anchors do not require argument. They are dates, events, and recordings of public acts. Licenses were issued in 2019. Wuhan was named among pilot cities in 2019 for advanced network deployments. The city entered lockdown on January 23, 2020. A global pandemic was declared on March 11, 2020. Between those anchors lies the chorus of announcements and experiences. Press coverage about smart hospitals, press coverage about hospital overload, promises of connected logistics, images of controlled movement. The Chronicle doesn't need to claim a direct line of causation to reveal the choreography. The choreography is visible in the rhythm of public life. The human layer narration must carry lived experience. A network mast isn't only a technical installation. It's a signal that the invisible architecture of daily life is changing. A lockdown isn't only a public health measure. It's a signal that the visible architecture of daily life is changing. Wuhan lived both changes at once. The double change taught the world how to feel about scale. Large systems can move together, and when they do, individuals move less. That feeling is sticky. It becomes habit. It becomes expectation. Households learned the soundscape of newscasts. Workers learned the cadence of digital tools. Students learned the logic of screens. Patients learned the lexicon of protocols. Vendors learned the timing of deliveries. The seam between necessity and efficiency narrowed. It is in that seam that policy becomes durable. Discipline Moving Forward Section 2 is not an accusation. It is a sharpening. The task is to keep the ledger pure. Do not gild dates with speculation. Do not replace local verification with grand narratives. Do not trade tempo for comfort. The Chronicle's power is in overlay, not in opinion. Wuhan is the crucible because it shows how two monumental scripts can occupy the same streets at the same time, teaching the rest of the world what to accept and how to accept it. Carry this discipline into Italy, Spain, the UK, and the United States. Map the country timelines against their local atmospheres. Anchor each claim in a date, a place, a recorded moment, and a lived experience. Make the story impossible to wave away because it is built from the ordinary facts of public life. Citizen audit, call to action, map dates, infrastructure installs, auctions, announcements. Map measures, restrictions, capacity changes, protocols. Map feelings, what people did, what they feared, what they adapted to. Overlay, put the maps on top of each other and read the rhythm out loud. The chronicle must be both ledger and feeling. Without dates, the narrative floats. Without feeling, the narrative fails to move. Wuhan gives us both. That's why this chapter is long. That's why this chapter is narrated. The audience should not only understand, they should recognize themselves in the patterns, even if they are thousands of miles away. Wake TF up. Sovereign Signal is the channel. Help spread the word. Give us a like, subscribe, and share. If you valued the truth in this video, press the notifications bell so you never miss another fact-filled broadcast. Together, we keep the ledger pure, and together, we break the theater of control.